I hope that you all had a good morning, that you've enjoyed your lunches. Those of you in the overflow room, thank you for volunteering to do that. My role here is very brief. It's basically just to introduce the next speakers. So I did want to just remind you to be sure to fill in your conference survey so that we can see what your thoughts are on improvements for the next one. Also to announce that the reception and poster session will be in the same room starting at 6:30 this evening. So please be sure to come by and talk to the students who are doing the posters and enjoy the reception. So I have the privilege and pleasure of introducing my former boss, Ben Schlesinger, who is the past president and head of the awards committee. For those of you who are unfamiliar with how the kind of leadership structure of the USAEE works, it's really a 4-year commitment. You start out as a president-elect and you're in charge of the strategic plan, so you can kind of set the guidelines for your presidential year. You then serve as the president and are basically the host of the North American Conference, and then in your 3rd year, you're head of the nominating committee, and in the 4th year, which is Ben's position this year, you're head of the awards committee. So I'd like to introduce Ben, who will make the awards announcement. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lori. It's such a delight to work with and doing such a wonderful job as president. I can say I'm proud, and I am. The Adelman Frankel Award is given to an individual or organization for a unique and innovative contribution to the field of energy economics. That's off the website. Actually, there's more to say than that. The award is this is the most prestigious honor that the U.S. Association for Energy Economics can bestow. It's gone to some of the field's most famous and most innovative energy economists. There were years when it wasn't bestowed. But not this year. Our awards committee was delighted to present, the Adelman Frankel Award this year to the Center for Energy Studies at the James A. Baker III Institute for Public Policy at Rice University. Particularly, the center has been producing some of the most authoritative and creative analyses of natural gas policy and economic issues anywhere. Their work and insights have been utterly invaluable to all energy advisors and teachers in our field. This award to them, in our view, is overdue. Accepting this year's Adelman Frankel Award on behalf of the Institute will be Dr. Kenneth B. Medlock, Senior Director of the Institute's Center for Energy Studies. Ken, congratulations. Pictures may be taken together.
So I guess as is customary, I've been asked to say a few words. It's difficult to actually think of anything appropriate to say, to be honest with you, when I'm accepting an award on behalf of a lot of people, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, so to speak. Because the Center for Energy Studies at the Baker Institute was an expansion of an initiative that started about 17 years ago. Really geared towards, I'm trying to understand how various issues can affect policy and how policy can affect markets. The inception of what was previously called the Energy Forum was really geared to be a membership group designed to facilitate interaction between academics and industry. It's been remarkably successful. It's actually still a fundamental feature of the Center for Energy Studies. And so when you try to say thanks for all the work that has led to this award, it really is, it's everybody. It's all the individuals at Rice that I've been so fortunate to work with. Amy Jaffe, prior to her moving to the University of California, Davis. Peter Hartley has been a colleague for many years, dating back to my time as a graduate student at Rice, actually working as a research associate with the energy program. So, and the list goes on and on. We've been able to learn tremendous amounts of information to inform our data-driven, and that's really one of the critical things that sets us apart, I think, from a lot of other institutions that look at policy issues, is we do ground ourselves in economic analysis. And it's grounded in trying to understand all of the pieces that go into forming commercial decisions. This means diving all the way underground, thinking about lately, for example, work we've been doing in a collaborative way with the University of Texas Bureau of Economic Geology, how to characterize shale resources, and ultimately what that means for understanding what break-even costs are, to be blunt. So all of these things sort of go into the hopper, if you will, and allow us to generate a tremendous amount of information. Collaborations have always been something that we've been very keen on. We're at Rice, a relatively small institution, so we actually do benefit tremendously from engaging with other partners, both in industry and in academia. A long history of working with people at Stanford, at Harvard, most recently at Carnegie Mellon. So just sort of, we can go down the list, and I don't want to leave anybody out, but it's been really fortunate for us to be able to draw on all this expertise and be able to do the things we do. We've, over the last few years, been able to really develop some pretty sophisticated models that allow us to stress what would otherwise be considered commercial outcomes via different kinds of policy interventions. And this is one of the ways we can effectively quantify externalities associated with policy. And this is a big focus of the work we do, and it will continue to be a big focus of the work we do. Over the next 2 to 5 years, we'll be doing a tremendous amount of work actually looking at shale, as we have been over the last 2 to 5 years. But in particular, we'll be looking at how various state policies and federal policy overlays in that regard will influence shale gas developments and shale oil developments, and then taking it a step further beyond just understanding what's going to happen to the upstream and midstream levels, but actually moving downstream to understand a little bit more about what the tremendous resource opportunity that we have in North America means for all of the various interested parties. So it's not just about LNG exports. It's also about industrial opportunities in the petchem sector and other gas-intensive sectors, as well as power generation. And then, of course, that facilitates discussions about lowering carbon intensities and other sort of environmental benefits that follow therein. So keep a lookout, because all this stuff is coming. We'll be rolling out things as we always have been in a very consistent manner, understanding that, I have a saying, back up. When you're in the policy space, you always worry about being too right-leaning or too left-leaning. I know that we've done something right when we get criticized from both sides of the aisle. So, it's usually the way we try to sort of, hit right back up the middle. Because quite frankly, the data is going to tell the story, and you can't really manipulate it. And if you try to, it's going to come out. So, with that, I'll go ahead and step down, but I want to say thank you again, and it's been a great pleasure to interact with all of you, because certainly everything that's happened at the Baker Institute has benefited tremendously from the interaction with USAEE, and you can see that we at Rice take it very seriously, quite frankly, because we actually have 2 existing graduate students here and 2 who recently just graduated, and we'll continue to promote that, very profitable engagement. Because our graduate students get a lot from being able to interact via the conference venues and presentations, getting feedback, and then networking, quite frankly, because a lot of you guys are great potential employment opportunities, so I can't let that go without being said. With that, I'll go ahead and stop, and again, thank you.
Thank you, Ken, and congratulations. I realized that I failed to do the one thing I was supposed to, which was to introduce the head table. You've already met Ken Medlock and Ben Schlesinger, Lori Schell, Roger. We met Roger Marks earlier today. Jack Roderick, who will be our speaker, and Matt Berman from the University of Alaska. I think it's purely coincidence that the insiders are all over here and the outsiders are all over here. So with that, I'll turn the podium over to Roger.
For those of you who are interested in low probability events, the discovery of a 25 billion barrel field in 1967 on the North Slope of Alaska is a good story. And the definitive telling of that story was made in the book Crude Dreams that was published in 1997, as well as all the events that led up to the discovery. And we're very fortunate to have the author of that book here today, Jack Roderick. Jack came up to Alaska in the 50s, where he started an oil reporting service. And since then, he has had his own exploration company. He's been a lawyer. He was the mayor of Anchorage. He was the deputy commissioner of the Department of Natural Resources. He was the state energy director, and he's been an adjunct professor at the University of Alaska. And although he and I have probably disagreed on every oil and gas policy issue over the past 20 years, it is my pleasure to introduce my good friend to that project.
Thank you, Roger. Let's see, I've got some things here. And I'll get this a little closer to me, right? How am I doing? Okay? Well, I'm delighted to be here, except Roger said that most of you are economists. I know nothing about economy. I'm a politician, or I was, let's put it that way. But my job here today is tell you some of the history of Alaska and how we became an oil state. And as Roger mentioned, I came up here from San Francisco by way of Seattle 60 years ago, worked in a cannery, became a truck driver, and when my employer went bankrupt, I started this oil reporting service. So what I know about oil, I've learned sort of from the outside. Let me see if I work this right. Yep. I show you this picture only to show you the complexity, land ownership complexity, and also the offshore. These are the sedimentary basins, and just about every sedimentary basin in Alaska has been drilled. So there was a lot of exploration going on in the early days. I should say too that seepages all over the world have been the first indicator of oil, of course. And even back in 1830s, the Canadians knew that there was an oil seepage up on the Arctic slope. And as the Russians decided to sell their land to us, the U.S., they knew there were seeps on the Gulf of Alaska, down south of her, both on the west side at a place called Keynote, and on the east side at Katella. You see Katella over on the right, Keynote on the left, and the stars where we are now. So now you're down in the Gulf of Alaska. There's a seep at Katella, and in 1901, believe it or not, a British consortium came here and drilled at Katella, at that seep. And their first well, they drilled to 69 feet. I'm sorry, no. Well, they drilled a shallow well and they produced 50 barrels a day. And then they drilled some more wells. That's the so-called first discovery. And here's, the Brits sold out to a group from Seattle, and they then built a refinery. And for 32 years, they produced diesel that went into the railroad that ran from Cordova up to Kennecott. In 32 years, they produced 154,000 barrels. That's about, what, a fourth of a day from Prudhoe. And then, by chance, when the copper mine shut down, the refinery burned. So that was the end of that. Now let's jump to 1920. Over on the west side of the Gulf of Alaska, there were seeps at a village called Keynote. And prior to 1920, you had to stake for oil just like you do other minerals. But Congress passed the Mineral Leasing Act in 1920. That got the attention of Chevron. In those days it was Standard of California. They came up in 1923 and drill several wells. Again, at the seeps. Again, no major production. The same year, 1923, Congress set aside the west half of the Arctic slope into what was called Petroleum Reserve Number 4. Number 3 was at Teapot Dome down in California. And now, of course, the west half is called the National Petroleum Reserve Alaska. Let's fast forward a little bit now. In 1950, the guy in the hat on the right is a man named Bill Ferrand. He's up there in 1923. We're back now in the Petroleum Reserve Number 4. He spent 2 summers up there with that gang trying to figure out, is there any oil in the Petroleum Reserve? He found a lot of coal, but he didn't find anything that really looked much like gas. But now we're down in a place called Icy Bay on the east shore of the Gulf of Alaska, where Phillips drilled 2 dry holes between 54 and 57. And the man on the right is Phil O'Rourke. In those days, he was the only employee of a major oil company living in Alaska. Phil was a geologist. And after the dry hole, they decided, well, Phillips is going to pull out, and they started to, but a company from Los Angeles, a relatively small major oil company, Richfield Oil Corporation, in the Moose Range in 1957 brought in Alaska's first commercial well at Swanson River. More than 500 million barrels. It's on the Kenai Moose Range, as I said. As a result of that, there were about 20, we're still not federal land, remember. About 25 million acres were leased all over Alaska, except, of course, on the North Slope, because it wasn't available. Chevron brought half of Richfield's action on the Kenai, took over the management of the Swanson River field, and then in '63, Richfield made a deal with Exxon because Richfield had moved up to the Arctic slope and on federal land, and they made a deal with Exxon, and Exxon paid them $3 million to take half interest in what they were going to find up on the Arctic slope. That was some deal, huh? There's the July of '57. And then a year later, only a year later, Congress awarded us statehood. Ike signed the bill on January 3rd, '59. We had a population of about 200,000 at that time. And the politics was get rid of outside interests, fish traps, ownership in Seattle. We were a place that felt very strongly about controlling our future. And we could finally vote for our governor. Up to that time, the president appointed our governor. Under statehood, the state was given 25 years to elect 104 million acres, titled all offshore land out to 3 miles, as had other states. Very little private land in Alaska, still is, till the natives show up shortly. Well, the state needed money to set itself up. So it started offering offshore land in Cook Inlet. on a bonus bid basis. All our leases are given on a cash basis, fixed royalty, with a few little exceptions if we want to do that. At the time, the state had a 1% severance tax. The prime movers in Cook Inlet at that time were Chevron, Union, Shell, Marathon, Pan American, but a whole raft of other companies, Sinclair, Skelly, Atlantic, Gulf, British American Husky, et cetera, were active, looking for oil. And in the 60s, the mid-60s, lots of discoveries in the inlet and platforms were installed. I think we had 14 at one point, maybe we still do. And there are the fields that are generally in Cook Inlet. And of course, as you know, that we finally have 2 offshore rigs operating in Cook Inlet that we haven't had for 3 decades. I'm not a geologist, but I think that Cook Inlet is a gas province. We're going to find a lot of gas, if any legislators are listening, because we don't really need, I don't think, to bring the gas from the Cook Inlet down here. I don't think. Two months before our famous 1964 earthquake, Bill Egan, our governor, decided, okay, I'll select some land on the North Slope for the state. He selected 1,003,000 acres on the coastal plain between Anwar and the Petroleum Reserve. Why these acres? You'll have to read my book. I have a theory and I think it's right. So that's the selection up there on the coast. And then, of course, the earthquake in March of '64. We needed the money again, of course. So we put up, the state put up leases up on the slope. Cash bonus, fixed royalty again. The sales, the first was in 1964, December after the earthquake. And most of it turned out to be Kaparic, and most of it gotten by Sinclair.